The strange markings. The Velthrani diplomatic vessel moved silently through the darkness of space as it approached the human fleet that waited near the border station. And Ambassador Kefora stood at the observation deck with her 4 violet eyes narrowing as she studied the approaching warships that grew larger with each passing moment. Something was wrong, and she could feel it deep within her twin hearts as they began to beat faster than normal. "Counselor," she said with her voice carrying the harmonic undertones that her species used to express distress and confusion, "what are those images painted on the human vessels?" Counselor Mithrin walked over to join her at the viewport, and his pale blue skin flushed to a darker shade as he processed what he was seeing through the transparent barrier that separated them from the cold vacuum beyond. The human ships were unlike anything they had ever encountered before, and their angular hulls were brutal in design with sharp edges and heavy armor plating that spoke of violence and conflict. But it was not the design that disturbed the two Velthrani diplomats as they stared in growing unease at the fleet before them. It was the paintings. Enormous images covered the hulls of the human warships, and each one depicted creatures with massive teeth and burning eyes and claws that seemed ready to tear through the very fabric of space itself. "I do not know what they are," Mithran admitted with his voice barely above a whisper. "They appear to be some form of animals, but I have never seen anything like them in all my years of studying alien species." Kefora felt a chill run through her body despite the warmth of the ship around her, and she found herself unable to look away from the terrifying images that decorated the human vessels. All her centuries of diplomatic service across 17 different star systems, she had never encountered anything quite like this strange and disturbing practice most spacefaring species decorated their vessels with geometric patterns or mathematical proofs or abstract representations of their philosophical ideals and highest values. The Velthrani themselves adorned their ships with crystalline fractals that represented universal harmony and the interconnected nature of all living things in the cosmos. But these humans had painted monsters on their warships, and they had done so with obvious pride and care. The lead human vessel was a massive dreadnought that dwarfed even the largest Velthrani transport ships, and on its hull was painted the image of a creature with brown fur and a humped back and jaws that looked capable of crushing steel beams. Like they were nothing beneath the terrifying image were words written in human script that read "Grisly Division" in bold letters that could be seen from great distances. Another ship that appeared sleeker and faster than the dreadnought displayed a gray-furred creature with yellow eyes that seemed to glow with predatory intelligence, and its fangs were bared in a snarl that made Kefora want to flee back to her homeworld. Wolfpack Squadron was written along its flank in the same bold lettering. "Open a channel to their fleet commander," Kefora ordered as she tried to steady her nerves and maintain the composure expected of a senior diplomat. "I must speak with whoever is in charge of these vessels." The holographic display flickered to life after a moment of waiting, and it revealed a human male wearing a dark uniform covered in medals and insignia that marked his rank and achievements. His face was weathered and marked by what Kefora had learned humans called scars, which were permanent marks left behind by wounds that had healed but never fully disappeared. His eyes held a calm intensity that made her uncomfortable in ways she could not fully explain even to herself. "Ambassador Kefora," he said, while inclining his head slightly in a gesture of respect that humans used when greeting dignitaries. "I am Admiral Daniel Morrison of the United Earth Navy, and I welcome you to our sector of space." "Admiral Morrison," she replied while struggling to maintain her diplomatic composure in the face of those unsettling images, still visible through the viewport behind the holographic display. "I must ask you a question that may seem strange to you. Of course, you may ask me anything," he responded with his voice calm and measured. "The images on your ships," she began while gesturing toward the viewport, where the painted creatures seemed to stare back at her with hungry eyes. "The creatures you have depicted on your hulls, what are they, and why do you display them so prominently for all to see?" Something shifted in the Admiral's expression, and it was subtle enough that most species would have missed it entirely. But Kethvora had studied human facial movements extensively. Was a slight tightening around the eyes, and an almost imperceptible lift at the corner of his mouth that she recognized after a moment of consideration. Pride was what she saw in his face, and it was deep and fierce and completely unapologetic. "Those are Earth animals," Admiral Morrison explained. "They are called bears and wolves, and they are predators from our homeworld." "Predators," Mithrin whispered from beside her, with his voice trembling slightly as the word left his lips. "Yes," the Admiral continued, with that same proud expression still visible on his scarred face. "They are part of our military tradition that stretches back thousands of years to the earliest days of human civilization, and we name our units after them and paint their images on our ships because they represent everything we aspire to be. As warriors," Kethvora felt cold despite the regulated temperature of her vessel, and she thought about her own species, which had evolved from herbivorous herd creatures on a peaceful world without predators. The Velthrani had achieved spaceflight through cooperation and intellectual pursuit, and they had never known predation or violence until they encountered other species among the stars. "But why would you honor such creatures?" she asked with genuine confusion coloring her harmonic voice. "Why would you celebrate animals that surely must have been dangerous to your ancestors?" Admiral Morrison's smile widened slightly, and there was something in his eyes that spoke of ancient memories and lessons learned in blood. "That is a long answer," he said, "one that would be better suited for our upcoming diplomatic summit, where we will have more time to discuss such matters in detail." He leaned forward slightly, and despite the vast distance between their ships, Kethvora felt as though he was looking directly into her soul with those intense human eyes. "But I will give you the short version of the answer you seek." She waited with both her hearts pounding in her chest, "because we remember what they taught us," the Admiral said, "and we will never forget." The channel closed and left Kethvora standing in silence, with her mind racing with questions that she was not entirely certain she wanted answered. But she knew that she would attend the summit, and she would learn the truth behind those terrifying images, no matter how disturbing that truth might prove to be. The history lesson, the diplomatic summit, was held aboard Neutral Station 7, which was a massive orbital platform that floated in the void between star systems and was jointly maintained by 12 different spacefaring species who had agreed to keep it as neutral ground for important meetings. Ambassador Kethvora had spent the 3 days of transit studying everything the Velthrani databases contained about Earth animals, and what she had learned during those long hours had disturbed her more deeply than she had expected. Bears were massive creatures that could weigh up to 800 kilograms, and they were capable of running at speeds that exceeded most ground vehicles. Despite their enormous size, they possessed claws that could tear through metal plating and jaws with a bite force that defied comprehension, and they were territorial and aggressive, and virtually unstoppable when provoked into action. Wolves were pack hunters of terrifying efficiency, who could track their prey across hundreds of kilometers without rest, and they communicated through a complex system of vocalizations and body language that allowed them to coordinate their attacks with deadly precision. These creatures worked together to bring down animals many times their own size, and they never gave up once they had chosen their target, and humans had lived alongside these monsters for their entire evolutionary history without being wiped out. The summit chamber was filled with representatives from dozens of different species who had come to witness this historic meeting between the Velthrani and the Fauni, and humans. The insectoid cricks clicked their mandibles nervously as they watched the proceedings from their designated seating area, and their compound eyes reflected the lights of the chamber in unsettling patterns. The gaseous Vaughn swirled with agitated currents inside their containment suits, and their formless bodies shifted colors that indicated deep unease and apprehension. The silicon-based Morath sat perfectly still in their crystalline forms that betrayed nothing of their inner thoughts or feelings about what was. Transpiring Admiral Morrison entered the chamber with a small delegation of human officers, and among them was a female. With sharp features and auburn hair that was pulled back severely from her face, she was introduced as Commander Lisa Hartley, and she served as the fleet's chief historian, whose job was to preserve and teach the traditions of the human military. Thank you all for attending this summit. Admiral Morrison began with his voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. I understand there's been some curiosity about our military traditions and the images we display on our vessels. He gestured to the woman beside him with a hand that bore old scars across the knuckles. Commander Hartley will provide some historical context to help you understand why we do what we do. The commander stepped forward and activated a holographic display that floated in the center of the chamber, where all the delegates could see it clearly. Images appeared in the air above their heads, and they were images that made several delegates gasp or emit distress signals in their native languages. A bear stood on its hind legs in the first image, and it towered over a human figure that looked impossibly small and fragile beside the massive predator. Wolfpack circled what appeared to be a large horned animal in the second image, and their yellow eyes gleamed with predatory focus as they prepared to strike. Close-up images followed, showing teeth and claws and eyes that held nothing but hunger and the desire to kill. For millions of years, Commander Hartley began with her voice steady and clear despite the disturbing nature of the images she was presenting. Humans were not the dominant species on Earth. She paused to let that statement sink in before continuing. We were prey. Murmurs rippled through the chamber as the various delegates processed this unexpected information about the species that had so recently burst onto the far galactic stage. Our ancestors were small and weak and slow compared to the predators that hunted them. The commander continued. We had no claws to defend ourselves and no fangs to fight back against our attackers, and we had no natural armor to protect our soft bodies from harm. She gestured to the images floating above them. We could not run fast enough to escape the predators that pursued us, and we could not fight them off when they cornered us in our primitive shelters. And every single day was a desperate struggle for survival against creatures like these that you see before you. The bear in the hologram seemed to stare down at the assembled delegates with ancient, hungry eyes. Bears would raid our camps in the night and drag away our children, Commander Hartley said. Wolves would hunt us across the plains until we collapsed from exhaustion, and great cats would stalk us through the forests and strike without warning from the shadows. She let the weight of her words settle over the first war chamber before speaking again. We were food to them and nothing more. The Crick's ambassador made a clicking sound that indicated shock and horror at what was being described. But we survived. Commander Hartley continued with a new tone entering her voice that sounded almost like pride. We learned from our suffering, and we adapted to the challenges we faced. And we watched the predators that hunted us with careful eyes, and we studied their methods. The images shifted to show primitive humans gathered around a fire in the darkness of night. We learned how the wolves worked together in their packs to bring down prey larger than themselves. And we learned how the bears used their incredible strength to dominate any challenger that dared to oppose them. And we learned how the cats employed stealth and patience to catch their victims. Unaware, new images appeared showing ancient cave paintings where humans were depicted hunting alongside wolves and carrying spears decorated with the teeth of great predators. Carvings of bears adorned warrior shields in another image, and banners displaying animal symbols flew over marching armies. In yet another, when we finally developed the tools and techniques to fight back against the creatures that had hunted us for so long, Commander Hartley said, we honored our teachers by wearing their images into battle. She turned to face the assembled delegates directly. We named ourselves after them because by taking their names we claimed their power as our own. And we told our enemies that we had learned from the most dangerous predators on our world. Admiral Morrison stepped forward to stand beside the commander. This tradition continued through our entire military history. He said, "When we built our first aircraft, we painted sharks and tigers on their noses. And when we launched our first warships, we named them after predators of land and sea and sky." His eyes swept across the chamber, taking in the reactions of every delegate present. When we reached the stars, we brought those traditions with us because they are part of who we are as a species. The Krix ambassador raised a trembling limb and spoke in a voice that quavered with emotion. "You mean to say that your species survived by becoming predators yourselves?" "Not exactly," Admiral Morrison replied with a slight shake of his head. "We became something more than that. And we became the species that learned from predators." He paused before delivering his final words. "The bears are strong, but they hunt alone. And the wolves work together, but they lack endurance. But humans combine the best traits of every predator we ever encountered, and we improved upon them." The chamber fell silent as the weight of his words settled over everyone present. When you see a bear on a human warship, you are seeing a promise that the crew will fight with unstoppable ferocity, he said. And when you see a wolf, you are being warned that the ship is part of a pack that is hunting. He smiled, and it was not a friendly expression at all, and the pack always catches its prey. The attack, the diplomatic summit, was interrupted on its fourth day by an emergency transmission that came screaming through the Sophronimustim communication systems with priority codes that demanded immediate attention from everyone present at Velthrani colony. World was under attack, and not just any colony world, but the very planet where Ambassador Kethvara had been born and where her entire extended family still lived. The attackers were identified as the Krethani, who were a species of ruthless raiders that had terrorized peaceful civilizations across multiple sectors for generations without anyone being able to stop them. Their black ships had appeared in Velthrani space without any warning, and they had descended upon the defenseless planet like a swarm of hungry parasites ready to consume everything in their path. They are demanding unconditional surrender. The communications officer reported with his voice shaking as he relayed the terrible news to the assembled delegates. "They say they will begin orbital bombardment in 6 hours if we do not comply with their demands." Kethvara felt her entire world collapsing around her as she listened to the report and processed what it meant for her people and her family. The Velthrani had no military forces to speak of, because they had never needed them in their long peaceful history among the stars. Their ships were designed for trade and exploration and scientific discovery, and they had no weapons capable of standing against the Krethani raiders who had built their entire civilization around warfare and conquest. Her people were about to be enslaved or destroyed, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to prevent it from happening. "Ambassador." She turned at the sound of the voice and found Admiral Morrison standing beside her with his scarred face grave and serious. "The United Earth Navy would like to offer our assistance in this matter," he said. Kethvara felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly extinguished by cold reality. "Your fleet is stationed 3 days away from Velthrani space," she said, with despair coloring every word that left her mouth. "Even at maximum speed, you could not possibly reach my world before the bombardment begins." The Admiral's expression did not change as he listened to her objection. "Our main battle fleet is indeed 3 days away," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "But I have 3 ships stationed at the edge of your territory for patrol purposes, and they can reach your world in approximately 4 hours. 3 ships against the Krethani Armada?" Kethvara said with disbelief clear in her voice. "Our sensors indicate they have 40 armed vessels in orbit around my planet. I am aware of the numbers," Admiral Morrison replied calmly. Kethvara stared. and him as if he had lost his mind, because surely no rational commander would send 3 ships against such overwhelming odds. You would send 3 of your vessels against 40 enemy warships? She asked. That is not courage, Admiral. That is suicide. Admiral Morrison met her gaze with those intense human eyes that she was beginning to recognize as a trait common to his species. Commander Hartley, he said, without looking away from Kethvara. What is the complement of Wolf Squadron? The commander stepped forward with a datapad in her hands. 3 vessels, sir, she reported. The Grey Hunter and the Midnight Howl and the Pack Leader, with a combined crew complement of 240 personnel. And their combat record? 17 engagements against numerically superior forces. Commander Hartley answered with obvious pride in her voice. 17 victories with 0 ships lost. Kethvara felt something stirring in her chest that she had almost forgotten was possible. It was hope. How is that possible? She asked in a whisper. Admiral Morrison turned back to her with the ghost of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Would you like to watch and see for yourself? The holographic display in the summit chamber was quickly reconfigured to show a live feed from the Velthrani system, and every delegate present gathered around to witness what was about to unfold. 40 Krethani warships hung in orbit above the planet, like dark omens of death and destruction, and their weapons were charged and ready to rain fire down upon the helpless civilization below. The colony's cities were visible on the night side of the planet as clusters of lights that represented millions of Velthrani lives waiting for their fate to be decided by forces beyond their control. Then 3 human ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. The vessels were smaller than the Krethani warships by a significant margin, and they looked almost fragile in comparison to the heavily armored raiders. But they were sleeker and faster than anything the Krethani had ever encountered, and on each hull, painted in sharp gray and white, was the image of a snarling wolf with yellow eyes that seemed to burn with predatory intelligence. Wolf Squadron 2. Krethani Forces. A voice crackled over the open communications channel that was being broadcast to the summit chamber. This is Captain Nathan Cole of the Pack Leader speaking. The voice was calm and steady, despite the impossible odds the speaker was facing. You have exactly 1 chance to withdraw from this system. Captain Cole continued. If you refuse to leave, then we will destroy every single one of your ships. Laughter erupted from the Krethani commander, whose sneering face appeared on the display. 3 tiny ships against 40 of our finest warships? He mocked with cruel amusement dripping from every word. Your arrogance is amusing, human, and we will enjoy adding your pathetic vessels to our collection of conquered trophies. That was your final warning. Captain Cole replied without any change in his tone. Attack them immediately. The Krethani commander screamed to his fleet. Destroy those insignificant insects and show them what happens to those who dare to challenge the might of... His words were cut off abruptly as the 3 human ships exploded into motion. Kethvara had witnessed combat footage before and sanitized recordings that were used for tactical analysis and historical documentation. But this was nothing like those sterile presentations of violence. The human ships moved with a coordination that seemed absolutely impossible as they weaved through the Krethani formation like dancers performing a deadly ballet. They never attacked alone, and whenever one ship drew fire from the enemy, the other 2 would strike from completely unexpected angles that left the Krethani scrambling to respond. When groups of raiders tried to concentrate their weapons on a single target, that vessel would slip away like smoke on the wind while its packmates tore into the distracted ships with devastating precision. They are using wolf hunting tactics, Commander Hartley explained quietly to those watching in the summit chamber. They draw the attention of the strongest prey and keep it focused on one member of the pack while the others circle around and attack from behind. The Krethani ships began to panic as they realized they were not fighting a conventional battle against a weaker enemy. Their formation broke apart as individual captains tried to flee or regroup, but the human ships anticipated every move before it was made. They herded their enemies like wolves herding prey animals, and they cut off escape routes and forced the raiders into tight clusters where their own ships blocked each other's fields of fire. In 80 minutes, the battle was over. 14 Crethani vessels were nothing but expanding clouds of debris drifting through the void, and 9 more were disabled and drifting helplessly with their weapons silenced and their engines dead. The remaining 17 ships fled into faster-than-light travel as fast as their drives could carry them, and they abandoned their wounded comrades without a second thought. Not a single human ship had suffered serious damage during the entire engagement. Captain Cole's voice came over the channel again, and it was just as calm and professional as it had been at the start of the battle. Wolf Squadron to Velthrani Colony, he said. The threat has been neutralized and your world is safe. Medical and emergency teams are standing by if you require any assistance. Kefvara found that her hands were shaking as she stared at the display, and she turned to look at Admiral Marson with new eyes. That is what the Wolf teaches. The Admiral said quietly, never fight alone and never fight fair. Work together and communicate constantly, and never let your enemy rest or recover. He met her gaze with those ancient warrior eyes. The pack hunts as one, and the pack brings down giants. The reckoning the Crethani leadership was absolutely furious when they received word of what had happened at the Velthrani colony world. The complete humiliation of their raiding fleet at the hands of just 3 small human ships had spread across the entire galaxy like wildfire, and their fearsome reputation as unstoppable conquerors was crumbling with each passing day. Species that had cowered before the Crethani for generations were now whispering about the humans who had sent the mighty raiders running with their tails between their legs. The Crethani High Command responded to this embarrassment in the only way they knew how, and that was with overwhelming brutal force too. Weeks after what the humans were calling the Battle of Velthrani Prime, the Crethani gathered together the largest armada in their entire history of conquest. 300 warships assembled at their staging area, with crews that burned with the desperate need for vengeance against the species that had made them look like fools. The target they selected was New Montana, which was a major agricultural colony that supplied food to a dozen different human worlds and represented a vital part of Earth's interstellar infrastructure. Intelligence reports indicated that New Montana was defended only by a single orbital station and a small patrol fleet that would pose no challenge to the massive armada bearing down upon it. The Crethani expected an easy victory that would restore their tarnished reputation and teach the humans a lesson about challenging their betters. They did not know about Grizzly Division. The Crethani armada dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the New Montana system, fully prepared to sweep aside any pathetic resistance and claim their prize. Instead, they found 12 human vessels waiting for them in a defensive formation between the fleet and the planet. These ships were massive compared to the sleek, Wolf-painted vessels that had humiliated them before, and each one bristled with weapons that made the Crethani sensors light up with warning indicators. And on every single hull, painted in brown and gold, was the image of a rearing bear with its claws extended and its jaws opened wide. In a roar of challenge, Grizzly Division to unidentified fleet, came the transmission from the lead human ship, which was the largest of them all. This is Commodore Rachel Torres of the Einheit, and you have entered human territory without authorization. Her voice was hard as steel and completely unafraid. State your intentions immediately. The Crethani Supreme Commander was a scarred veteran named Voreth, who had led countless successful raids against weaker species, and he laughed at the humans' challenge. 12 ships against 300 of our finest? He sneered with contempt dripping from every word. Even you humans cannot possibly be foolish enough to believe you can stand against us. We are not going to run away from you. Commodore Torres replied, and we are not going to hide from what is coming." Her next words were spoken with absolute conviction. "If you want New Montana, then you will have to go through us to get it. Then we will go through you and grind your bones to dust." Vorith snarled back. "All ships advance and prepare to fire on my command." The massive Crethani fleet began moving forward with weapons powering up across 300 hulls. Vorith watched the human ships carefully as his armada approached, and he noticed something strange about their behavior. They were not maneuvering at all, and they were not even attempting to evade the overwhelming force bearing down upon them. They simply held their position, floating motionlessly in the void like mountains that refused to move. "What are they doing?" His second-in-command asked with a nervous edge to his voice. "They are dying," Vorith replied with cruel satisfaction. "Open fire and destroy them all." The first wave of Crethani weapons struck the human ships with devastating force as energy beams and kinetic projectiles and plasma torpedoes slammed into their hulls. From dozens of different angles, the human ships did not move an inch. The attacks continued as concentrated fire from ship after ship pounded the 12 defenders with everything the Crethani armada could throw at them. Armor cracked under the assault, and hull breaches opened in several locations across the human formation. But still the human ships held their position without giving a single meter of ground, and then they started firing back. The human weapons were different from anything the Crethani had ever encountered before, and they were slower to charge than the Raider weapons, but impossibly powerful when they finally discharged. Each shot from the Ironhide's main batteries tore through multiple Crethani vessels like they were made of paper and left nothing but expanding clouds of debris in their wake. The other 11 ships in Grizzly Division added their own devastating fire in coordinated volleys that targeted clusters of enemy ships and turned entire squadrons into funeral pyres burning in the darkness of space. They are not fighting like the wolves did, Vorith realized with sudden fear gripping his heart as he watched his fleet being torn apart. They are not moving at all. Sara weapons are barely penetrating their armor. His tactical officer screamed with panic in his voice. "Those ships are built like nothing we have ever seen before. They are built like bears." Vorith whispered as understanding finally dawned in his mind. He finally understood what he was facing. Wolves had been fast and elusive, and they had used movement and coordination to defeat their enemies through superior tactics, but these ships were something entirely different and terrifying in their own way. They had planted themselves directly in the path of the Crethani fleet, and they absolutely refused to move no matter how much punishment they absorbed. They were taking damage that would have destroyed any other vessels in the galaxy, and they were dealing back destruction that was 10 times worse. A bear does not run away from a fight, and a bear does not hide from its enemies. A bear stands its ground and fights with such overwhelming power that nothing in the universe can stand against it. "Concentrate all fire on the lead ship," Vorith screamed to his remaining captains. "Pour everything we have into destroying it." 50 Crethani vessels turned their weapons on the Ironhide and unleashed a storm of destruction that lit up the darkness of space. The human ship's shields collapsed under the assault, and its heavy armor buckled in several places as the concentrated fire found weaknesses to exploit. Fires erupted across the Ironhide's hull, and escape pods began launching from damaged sections, but Commodore Torres's voice remained steady and calm on the open communications channel. "Grizzly Division execute Formation Delta," she commanded. "Show these raiders what we are made of." The 11 remaining human ships tightened their formation around the wounded Ironhide and shielded it with their own hulls while continuing to pour devastating fire into the Crethani fleet. When enemy ships tried to circle around to attack from new angles, the human vessels would rotate as a group, presenting fresh armor to the attackers, while the damaged sections were frantically repaired by damage control teams working in the midst of battle. They fought for 6 hours without pause or rest. 6 Hours of continuous brutal combat that will be recorded as the most intense naval engagement in modern galactic history by the time the guns finally fell silent. 87 Crethani ships had been reduced to drifting wreckage, and another 140 were so badly damaged that they could no longer fight. The surviving Crethani fled into faster-than-light travel and left their empire's dreams of easy conquest burning. In the void behind them, every single ship in Grizzly Division had suffered massive damage during the battle, and 2 of them had lost more than half of their brave crews. The Ironhide itself was barely holding together, and only the desperate efforts of its engineering teams kept it from breaking apart entirely. But none of them had been destroyed, and none of them had retreated from the fight. Not one of them had even considered the possibility of surrender Grizzly Division to New Montana Colony. Commodore Torres transmitted with her voice hoarse from exhaustion and the smoke that filled her damaged bridge. The hostile fleet has been repelled, and your world is safe. When the news of the battle spread across the galaxy, every species that had ever suffered from Crethani raids began to look at humanity in a completely different way. These strange primates from a small blue world, who painted predators on their ships and fought with the ferocity of ancient beasts, were something new in the universe, something terrifying to their enemies, and something wonderful to those who needed protection. The Legacy Ambassador Kethvara requested a private meeting with Admiral Morrison. Exactly 1 month after the Battle of New Montana had shaken the foundations of galactic politics, the war against the Crethani was effectively over now because their raider fleets had been shattered beyond any hope of recovery, and their empire was crumbling as former victims rose up against their weakened oppressors. But there was something that Kethvara still needed to understand before she could move forward. With her life and her duties, they met on the observation deck of Neutral Station 7 and stood together, looking out at the endless stars that stretched across the universe in all directions. The silence between them was comfortable rather than awkward because they had developed a mutual respect during the weeks of diplomatic negotiations that had followed the battles. "I have a question for you, Admiral," Kethvara finally said, while keeping her 4 violet eyes fixed on the distant points of light. "It is something that has troubled me ever since I first saw your ships and the images painted upon their hulls. You may ask me anything, Admiral." Morrison replied with his hands clasped behind his back in a posture she had learned was common among human military officers. "The wolves and the bears that you honor so greatly." She began slowly as she chose her words with care. "These predators hunted your ancestors for millions of years according to what Commander Hartley told us." She turned to face him directly. "They killed your people and ate your children and made every day a desperate struggle for survival against impossible odds." The Admiral nodded slightly to acknowledge the truth of her words. "How can you paint their images on your vessels with such obvious pride?" Kethvara asked. "How can you name yourselves after creatures that cause such tremendous suffering to your species throughout your entire evolutionary history?" Admiral Morrison was silent for a long moment as he considered her question with the seriousness it deserved. "Because they made us what we are today," he finally answered with his voice soft but filled with conviction. "I do not understand." Kethvara admitted. The Admiral turned to face her, and his scarred features were illuminated by the starlight streaming through the viewport. "The Velthrani evolved on a peaceful world where nothing threatened you," he said. "You had no predators hunting you through the darkness and no enemies forcing you to become stronger and smarter just to survive another day." Kethvara could not argue with his assessment because it was completely accurate. "Your species developed cooperation and intelligence to solve problems and build civilizations," the Admiral continued, "but you never faced true existential danger until you encountered hostile species among the stars." He gestured toward the viewport and the infinite darkness beyond. "When the Crethani came to your worlds, your people had No concept of how to deal with them, because you had never needed to learn such things. That is true, Kethvara admitted quietly. We were helpless before them. Humans are different, Admiral Morrison said. We evolved in a crucible of constant violence where every single day was a battle for survival against creatures that wanted to devour. Eustace. His eyes grew distant, as if he was looking back across millions of years to see his ancestors huddled around their fires in the darkness. The predators that hunted us did not show mercy or compassion because such concepts meant nothing to them. He said, they taught us through blood and death that the universe is a dangerous place where peace must be earned through strength. He met her gaze with those intense human eyes. They taught us that survival requires the willingness to fight, and to never give up no matter how hopeless things might seem. But they were your enemies. Kethvara protested. They tried to destroy your species. No, Admiral Morrison said firmly with a shake of his head. They were not our enemies at all, and thinking of them that way misses the entire point. He paused to gather his thoughts before continuing. They were our teachers. He said, the wolves did not hunt us out of malice or hatred. They hunted us because that is simply what predators do. And in doing so, they forced us to become something greater than we ever could have been otherwise. He gestured at the stars. Beyond the viewport, we paint bears and wolves on our ships because they are our heritage and our legacy. He explained. They remind us of where we came from and what we survived against impossible odds. And they remind us that we were forged in fire and tempered by struggle. His voice grew stronger as he spoke. Those images tell anyone who sees them that humanity carries the lessons of 1,000,000 years of evolution within us, and that we will never again be easy prey for anyone or anything. Kethvara thought about her own people and their peaceful history that had left them so completely unprepared for the dangers of a hostile universe. She thought about what the Velthrani might have become if they had faced such terrible challenges in their own past. You do not hate them, she realized suddenly as understanding finally dawned within her. You are grateful to them. Admiral Morrison smiled, and it was a genuine expression of warmth rather than the predatory grin she had seen during discussions of battle. The wolves and bears made us what we are. He confirmed, without them we might have remained small and weak and helpless forever, but instead we became the species that walks among the stars and fights. For those who cannot fight for themselves. He looked out at the stars with something like reverence in his eyes. Every time a human pilot climbs into a fighter with a wolf painted on its nose, they are honoring an ancient tradition that stretches back to the very beginning of our species. He said, they are saying that they remember what our ancestors faced, and they remember what those ancestors learned. And the bears? Kethvara asked. The bears remind us that sometimes running away is not an option. The Admiral replied, sometimes. Hiding is impossible, and the only choice left is to plant your feet and bare your teeth and fight with everything you have until either you win or you die. He turned to face her directly. That is what it means to be human. He said, we do not give up, and we do not surrender, and we stand our ground no matter how overwhelming the odds against us. Kethvara was silent for a long time as she processed everything she had learned during their conversation. Finally, she spoke again, and her voice carried a new determination that had not been there before. The Velthrani have no such traditions of our own, she said. We have no predators to honor and no lessons written in blood and survival to guide us. And we face the dangers of the galaxy completely unprepared. Admiral Morrison turned to her with a thoughtful expression on his weathered face. Then, perhaps it is time to create new traditions for your people, he suggested. The wolves and bears taught us, but we can teach others in turn. What do you mean? She asked. We can share with others not the fear of predators, the Admiral explained, but rather the courage that those predators inspired within us, and the strength that we found when we had no choice but to survive or perish. You would share your lessons with the Velthrani? Kethvora asked with surprise clear in her voice. We would share them with anyone who is willing to learn, Admiral Morrison replied. The galaxy is a dangerous place, and there will always be species like the Crethony who are willing to prey upon those weaker than themselves. He met her gaze with steady eyes. The only defense against such predators is to refuse to be weak. Kethvara made a decision in that moment that would change the entire course of Velthrani history forever. Teach us, she said with conviction ringing in every word. Teach my people what the wolves and bears taught you so long ago, and show us how to fight and survive and stand our ground against any enemy. Admiral Morrison extended his hand toward her in the human gesture of agreement that she had learned to recognize during her diplomatic training. Welcome to the pack, Ambassador. He said. She took his hand and her grip was firm and sure. And somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, the spirits of ancient predators howled their approval at what was unfolding, their lessons that had been written in blood and survival. Across millions of years of evolution would continue into the future new. Students from distant worlds would learn the wisdom of the wolves and bears. New traditions would grow and flourish among species that had never known such things, and humanity would never forget what their teachers had given them or the debt they owed to the predators that had forged them into the warriors they had become. The legacy of the wolves and bears would endure forever among the stars.